One little act of kindness can go a long, long way. Two little acts of kindness can brighten anyone's day. Three little acts of kindness can make a beautiful sound. Many acts of kindness help the world go round.
Hi, and welcome back to Tell Me What Happened, the podcast that features people from all walks of life talking about childhood experiences and how those experiences have impacted them as an adult. I'm your host, Jay Rehack, and like you, I've had my share of childhood good times and traumas. I'd like to think that all of the events of my childhood have made me a better person, but I know they certainly have impacted who I am today. Tell Me What Happened is sponsored by Sideline Ink Publishing, publishers of quality books, including Susan Salidor's classic, One Little Act of Kindness, which is also a song and available on Spotify. Tell Me What Happened is also sponsored by LaughSaver.com. Visit LaughSaver.com and record your laughter. We'll keep it for you, now and forever. It's free, and your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and your great-great-grandchildren will thank you for it. That's LaughSaver.com. Go make a recording of your laughter today. All right. Well, today I have as my guest a good friend of mine, actually a family friend, a man I've known really his entire life, almost from the day he was born. I did actually know him on the day he was born. And our friend, my friend, great guy, Eli Boyer. Are you ready to tell your story?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Eli, I'm going to stop talking. You're going to take over, and we'll talk to you in a few minutes.
Okay, sounds good. So, you asked me this to come on to the show, I don't know, a week or so ago, but so I've been thinking a little bit about it. And, there certainly is a single story. I guess it's obviously, as many stories do, it spans over, a certain amount of time, but there's certainly one story in my life that has had a profound impact on me and the trajectory of my life and many of the relationships in my life as well. So it sort of starts back in high school. I was an athlete. I think that I played baseball in high school and really identified myself as an athlete. And during my junior year, I came across some struggles, as many teenagers do, in terms of, hey, I'm not playing enough. I don't know what I need to do to get on the field and that sort of thing. And I ended up quitting baseball. And so to me at that point, it was really just a loss of identity. And for, a 17-year-old kid who's developing an identity and developing a sense of self, that was a real challenge for me. And I admit that I fell into a pretty heavy depression, started misbehaving, in terms of smoking weed, drinking, doing dumb stuff like that, and, not doing great in school. And I think that my attitude towards the people closest to me, family in particular, and even more so my parents in particular, those relationships became very strained. I think that I manifested my depression through, anger and lashing out and, and sort of just trying to, skirt my way around facing what I was dealing with. I was in therapy, and I had been in therapy for some time, starting therapy as a young child, dealing with different types of things, anger, jealousy, whatever. As a middle child, we're riddled with lots of things that we need to address in therapy. So I was in therapy, and my therapist, suggested to me that I consider this leadership or wilderness therapy program, which was up in Minnesota. And 17-year-old kid, I said, I don't want to spend my summer like that. Get out of here. Like, I got girls, I got a job, I got to screw around, I got to do dumb stuff. Like, come on, I don't want to waste my summer like that. I sort of left it at that. And at that point, I guess I thought that it was maybe my decision, but it was something that sort of was in the back of my mind. A few months later, my parents, as we got closer to summer, my parents, brought it back up. And, and I sensed that it seemed a little bit less like a suggestion at that point in time, a little bit more like you're going to go to this thing. And I, of course, put up my fight, refused. I actually even went out to the suburbs. One of my best friends from grade school was living out in the suburbs. And I thought, hey, I'm just going to hide out there until they promise me that I don't have to do this thing. So they ended up saying like, come back. And I think I had to come back for a work shift anyway. And so it was the day before Father's Day. I was working my shift at that ice cream shop. I think it was called Sweet Occasions. I think it's long gone by now, but I came home about 1:00 in the morning. I'd closed up the shop, and my mom was up waiting for me. And I did think that was a little strange. I remember thinking, like, why was she waiting for me? As parents tend to do, I was just waiting for you to make sure you're home safe. So I didn't think too much about it. Then as I went upstairs and found, neither of my brothers were there, I continued to think, hey, something's going on. But, I said whatever, and, went into my room that was covered with, I don't know, if you ever went to my room when I was in high school, I had like pictures, sports. I cut out every single Sports Illustrated picture, imaginable. And it was like wallpaper and ceiling paper. You couldn't, it was the artwork of a kid going through some stuff for sure. So, I got into bed, and about 3 or 4 hours later, it's probably like 4:30 in the morning, my dad woke me up, and he said, Eli, you're going today. You're going to this program. He woke me up, and I said this to me, and I sort of, brushed him off. I said, fuck out of here. Like, what do you think you're just going to make me go? Like, get out of here. And, he said, I love you, and I hope this works. And he touched my back and left the room. At that point, there were 2 large gentlemen that came into my room, and they picked me up pretty aggressively in teenage boxers and t-shirt, whatever, and dragged me out to the car that they had and threw me in the back seat. At this point, the tears, I'm like you, Jay, I can't stop crying. I just keep going. I keep going. So my mom and dad had vacated. They weren't there. So I just had, I got into this car and, drove, I guess it was like 7 hours, and they took me up to Minnesota. And I was crying, I'd say probably 85% of the way. My mom, being the loving mother that she is, had packed a cooler with all my favorite snacks. I had like Arnie Palmer's, she had baked some pumpkin bread, Swedish fish. So, I think the first, 5-6 hours, I refused to touch it because I was so angry. But then I was like, oh man, that's my favorite shit. I got to get after that. So I got to the hotel, this program was was supposed to start the next day. And I had, they allowed me to make one call, and it couldn't be to my parents. And so I called my grandmother, I called mama, my mom's mom. And I said to her, why is this happening? I don't want to do this. And, come and get me and all this sort of stuff. And, she promised me that it would be okay. And, and she sang me the I See the Moon song that I have tattooed on my back. And, I think at that point, I sort of had accepted, the reality that this was going to happen. And, so the way it was set up is when my dad left the room that day, I was not to have any verbal communication with my folks for 7.5 weeks while I was exploring the boundary waters of Minnesota and immersing myself in this therapy program. And I was with several other young guys, everybody sort of dealing with different types of challenges. I was, as this program progressed, I got to know some of these guys and was one of the older ones, and certainly one of the ones who, having been a guy in sports, I happily stepped into like a leadership role and was always very excited about, the camping and the hiking and the canoeing. That stuff was great. The therapy program itself was, it wasn't, great, to be honest with you. I mean, even in retrospect, 13 years later, I think about that program and some of the things that the therapist that would come in, every couple of days, had us doing that. I don't know if that was really all that effective, but I'll sort of wrap up the story before we can kind of get into the next part. But the hardest thing for me in that, that entire experience was I left on Father's Day. To me, that was just, the hardest thing, because that was a day in which you're supposed to celebrate with your father. And yet, it got to the point where our relationship was so strained that, he had to send me to the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, to sort of sort my shit out a little bit. So I went through that program, and I remember, the last day, and certainly there was a lot of tears along the way, but, the last day, we actually, right before the last day, we had what was called like a solo trip where they sent us out into the woods by ourselves for 3 days. They would periodically come check on you, but you had your own little campsite, and they gave you parameters, and you couldn't leave, and it was pretty intense. And so we get to that last day, and it's sort of like, it's like one of those like reality shows, like there's the big reveal, like the parents and the kid coming together, and and I like broke down, like really broke down, just in joy, in happiness, in sorrow. And I mean, like, just I'm an emotional guy, and this was one of the most emotional times of my life, was seeing my parents after 7.5 weeks, having not seen their faces or heard their voices. It was quite emotional. So that's the story, essentially. I mean, of course, there's a lot of intimate detail that we don't necessarily need to, go into, but it was a pretty difficult time, and that was a challenging thing to do, to face the reality that that's where I was in my life, that it had gotten to that point. So that's the summer after my junior year. A little different than most, but
Oh my God. Oh
Yeah.
my God. I remember it
Yeah.
because I am tight with your family, and I must have blacked it out that it was Father's Day, but my Father's Day has never been the same, thinking about what you guys have been through and the courage of your whole family and everything. And I appreciate you telling me this story, because I think it helps a lot of other people who actually will hear this. But I got to ask you, because now you're 30 years old, and you're highly successful, and I know, at least as far as I can tell, you're tight with your mother and your father now. So how has it impacted your life, would you say, that particular moment?
Yeah, for sure. So I point to that as the biggest sort of, as I said, early on, the change of trajectory in my life. I don't know, where I would have been. I mean, I was always a very smart kid, but I was not, a hard worker. I sort of breezed through high school with like charming teachers, and, skating by and relying simply on just, whatever intelligence I had in my head, as opposed to, putting my best foot forward. But I'd say there's really two things that I would say in terms of a broader impact that have been long lasting. And, one is sort of that work ethic. I realized that I was just basically wasting time in my life, and like whatever was in my head. As I come from a family of very intelligent people, very academically inclined, very successful people in very different ways. And I had always felt like I was different, but I was only different because I wasn't applying myself. And I think that feeling of being different than the people that you love most, and it's not, it's okay to be different. Don't get me wrong. Like, we're all very different in our own ways, and that's a beautiful thing. But it's sort of, it was a gift that my parents gave me that I just wasn't using. Right, just this ability to put my best foot forward, to be a hard worker, to be engaging with people, and to be engaging with learning and things like that. That was a big takeaway. And certainly, when I went to college, I completely committed myself to being the best student that I could be. Having skipped many classes in high school, I didn't skip a single class in college. I was really devoted to my studies and that sort of thing. So, that's definitely one thing that I'd point to. That time as being, the catalyst for setting me on that course. But I think even bigger than that is, it's just my family. I say that program and the specifics of the therapeutic aspects of that program, I don't necessarily think were that effective. I learned a lot I went on to get a, degree in psychology and adolescent psychology nonetheless. So, I feel like I understand that a lot, but I wouldn't say that the program, though, wasn't effective, because it was effective. And for me, it was actually pretty simple. It took me out of my home and took me away from, the relationships that were most important to me, but that had been strained due to this depression. And I just realized, it didn't take me very long to realize how much I missed everybody, how much I valued my relationships with my parents, not just as being parents, but as them as individuals. They're like, having those types of people as your parents, and and you're treating them like that, it just made no sense, And so I think that it allowed me to take a step back and sort of reorient myself. I think as well as anybody that I'm a family man. I would probably take us girls and you guys sitting in the backyard over just about anything. That's my happy place. And I think that if I hadn't gone through that experience, that I don't know if that would be my happy place. I don't know if I would have ever been sort of pulled out of those depths. And so, I remember, I did communicate with my parents, but it was always via letters. And in those early letters, I was so angry. I was defensive and blaming and all these different things. And before I began to realize that they were the ones that were saving me, like they saved me by sending me to this place. Like and how hard that must have been for them and you and Susan and my brothers and Hope and Hannah. Like, my parents only told like 2 of my friends and my family that what was happening. Everybody else, I got all these text messages. People thought I was like dead. Like people I think I came back to like 300 text messages. People just be like, where are you? What's going on? But yeah, I just really think that it sort of brought me back to center and sort of helped me rediscover my heart a little bit, and my identity. I mean, my identity as an athlete was gone, but I sort of found my identity as a Boyer, as a Beal, as Eli Boyer in this family. And certainly, look, there have been bumps along the road. And of course, like since then, we've had a lot of things we've worked through, but I always have that to come back to. I always have the fact that I have incredible parents, incredible brothers. I have incredible uncles. I call you an uncle. I call Susan an aunt, and I'm beyond grateful for that. And so it was as I said, it was pretty impactful.
That's all incredibly powerful. I just can't stop thinking about, honestly, for years, I've always thought about the courage of all of you. I mean, your mother and your father, particularly,
I can't,
what it took for them, and your mother and your dad, because they're so tight with you, and they just wanted the best. They want the best for all their kids, of course, obviously, and everything. And it's it's a really sad story that ends pretty well, because I know that you are tight with your folks. And I do know that you're very tight with your brothers still, and the whole family and their community. You do have a larger community than that. You've always been one of those guys who I think builds his family. Your friends I know are really important to you as well. And you have some very, very good friends who endured different things, and you're able to help them with some of what they go through. I know you're very generous in that respect. And anyway, I really appreciate you telling me the story. It hurts
I'm
me
sorry,
to hear it
I'm sorry to I know it's one of those stories that might even hit a nerve for you. You probably have your own memories from that day, but certainly it's a powerful one, and I think one that not just brought me closer to my parents, but it brought all of us closer together. I mean, we all went through it. It wasn't just me. It was, we all went through it. So I have a pretty profound appreciation for that too.
Well, thank you, Eli, for telling us that story.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you on, because, like I said, I've known you for so long. And to be honest with you, when we talked about it, I was thinking about that story. I was like, there's nothing more.
No, you knew what story I was going to
kind of knew that. I go, if he goes there, you don't have to go there, in this.
No, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but I ended up writing sort of that short play my senior year that was performed in front of our entire school. That was terrible. I feel like if I could get through that, man, I can tell a story to anybody. I mean, 500 of my classmates, watching me get my quote unquote head, dumped, I had the Gatorade dumped on me by Josh. But yeah, no, I love, I think part of what this podcast is about is sharing these stories to allow people to connect you know, there's always some piece of a story, if not, you know, the whole thing that you can relate to, and you can pick a piece and say, I felt that, I understand that. And, you know, and it's had that same impact on me. Or maybe you understand it and it hasn't yet had the impact, and maybe it will in the future. So, like always, Woo, this is the type of stuff that comes out of the Rehack household. Just true and powerful, emotional, loving, all that good stuff.
Oh man, I'm exhausted, but thank you.
I know. And I want to keep talking, but as you know, I've got my father's birthday upstairs. So I do have to get out of here.
All right, well, I love you. Thanks for being on the show. We'll talk later.
I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Well, thank you, Eli, for being on the show. That's all we've got for you this week. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Sidelining Publishing, publishers of quality books, including Susan Salidor's One Little Act of Kindness, and I've Got Peace in My Fingers. I'd also like to thank laughsaver.com for supporting us. Visit laughsaver.com and record your laughter. We'll keep it for you now and forever. It's free, and your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren will appreciate it. That's laughsaver.com. Go and record your laughter today. And of course, I'd like to thank the listeners as well. Now, I'm going to end this show a little differently than what I usually do. Rather than use one of Susan Salidor's classic songs, what I'm going to do today is listen to Kathy Beale, Eli's grandmother, sing I See the Moon. So until next time, be safe out there and try not to hurt anybody.
I see the moon and the moon sees me and the moon sees somebody I want to see. God bless the moon and God bless me. God bless the somebody I want to see. I look down from up above to see the one I love. I see the one of all the rest, and that is why I love you best. I see the moon and the moon sees me and the moon sees somebody I want to see. God bless the moon and God bless me and God bless the somebody I want to see.